All right, party people, we're back with another reflection on the Daily Vedantic. And today we're going straight to some online research. Listeners might know that I'm an investor in OpenAI, and it as an investor in many startups, it has been nuts to see this company grow so fast. I love using the tool within reason, with responsibility. But sometimes I will ask it questions that blow me away philosophically, that it requires, I'm compelled to just read the answer to the audience through a Daily Vedantic episode. And recently I asked, is there logic to the philosophical idea of unity? And here was the answer that it gave, that I marked down. I was like, that deserves its own reflection on the Daily Vedantic. So here we go. The question is there logic to the philosophical idea of unity? And as listeners know, this philosophical idea of unity, Advaita means non-dual. Vedanta means end of knowledge. Non-dual, end of knowledge in Sanskrit. In terms of continuous study, the oldest philosophical ideas in the world, captured in the Vedas, the 4 philosophical texts in India that date back to 5,000 plus years ago. And here is the answer it gave. Is there logic to the philosophical idea of unity? Yes. There is logic to the idea of unity. The universe operates through interdependence. Every part affects and is affected by others, implying an underlying connectedness. Complex systems show that what seems separate is often just different expressions of the same process or structure. Physics suggests that matter and energy are interchangeable, meaning apparent diversity arises from one substrate. Biology shows shared genetic roots among all life, pointing again to common origin and structure. Consciousness, too, reveals relational dependence. Perception itself requires both subject and object, suggesting continuity rather than isolation. Multiplicity, therefore, can be seen as differentiation within a single continuum rather than true division. Multiplicity, therefore, can be seen as a differentiation within a single continuum. It's like choosing a specific color in the continuum. This is James speaking now. Like choosing a specific color in the continuum of the Roy G. Biv spectrum of colors. So it says, multiplicity, therefore, can be seen as a differentiation within a single continuum rather than true division. The logical position is that unity is the simplest and most consistent explanation for the coherence of existence. This logic, that's the answer, this logic of unity, it gets as simple as that in whatever that is, 8 sentences. It can get as abstract and dense as something like the space-time continuum, which was discovered 100 years ago. We discovered 100 years ago that space and time are one continuum. 100 years later, 10 out of 10 people on the street still view space and time as very different. 5 hours and 5 pounds of sand, that's got to be super different. And yet, scientifically, there is a continuum between space and time to where it's just called space-time. It's all one thing. That's the science. That's not the logic. That is through scientific logic, but it's certainly not just through thought process while you're driving down the highway, thinking through, when I act, other people are affected. When they act, I'm affected. The interconnectedness of, I'm kind of this separate, different being. But if you take me out of this environment, put me up in space, I got about 30 seconds before I no longer exist. Okay, maybe I do depend on very specific air pressure. Maybe I do depend on a very specific band of temperature. This idea of unity in the face of perceived diversity, that is what this philosophy is all about. Discovering the unity in the perceived diversity. That, with those examples that you can think through in 20 seconds, in the space-time continuum, which breaks brains when you think about it, to the simpler example, the simplest example, I think, that you could actually point to, which is given within this philosophy over and over and over again, the dream. That perceived diversity of other people, of other things, of walls, of trees, clothing, of shoes, of gravity, all these things that might have existed in your dream, the last dream you remember. And in reality, it was all you. That perception of separateness, of diversity, it was just a perception. You are making it all happen, and you yourself didn't even know what was about to happen. The drama of not knowing what was about to happen, and yet that drama was underpinned by this ignorance, this forgetfulness that you were the creator of the entire situation, the entire world of that dream. Recently, I talked about this. Unity in the midst of this perceived diversity is the deep end of the pool within this philosophy. That this philosophy, the deep end, is that this is all an illusion of separateness in a reality of unity. I said it's the deep end of the pool, and in some ways it is because it's the furthest from what gets reiterated by the culture around us. Community around us, certainly in the West, a community of fear, of scarcity. I recorded an episode about 3 or 4 weeks ago on even how language formed in the West versus the East. How you have language and philosophies of analysis. Root of the word analysis is to separate. In the West, you have the Greeks that lived in a very scarce environment. It was not resource abundant. It's constant fear of war. And then you have somewhere like India that is so resourceful, is so full of resources, so abundant, that you had at its height hundreds of kingdoms just living peacefully right next to each other. The amount of peace over the last few thousand years in India compared to just the last 100 years in the West is staggering. It is an astonishing contrast. But you add a bunch of resources, you add a bunch of abundance, and people get to think about things in a slightly different way. Instead of analytical, you have ideas and language that is built on synthesis, on connection, the root of the word synthesis, connection. Analytic, synthetic, language, words, constructs, frameworks on separateness, language, words, constructs, frameworks on unity. But in the West, fear, warfare, conflict, scarcity, these create these reverberations of these perceptions of separateness, these ideas, these philosophical movements that are about attainment, achievement, getting more, conquering, versus the oxygen and the space, the mental capacity, the resource abundance that allowed for the peace and transgenerational approach to peace and living life, that allowed for very different types of ideas. Very different types of ideas around understanding the universe, not ideas largely in the West around trying to conquer the universe. Ideas in the East around synthesis, connectedness, interdependence, the universe, our environment, each other, versus ideas in the West of fear of nature, of how to control the world around us, how to outcompete the communities to our east and the communities to our west. But the great blessing of the world we live in today is that we have exposure to these ideas from different places around the world. I mentioned recently that the Bhagavad Gita was only translated into English about 200 years ago. So we've had access to Western philosophy in our native English or native language transgenerationally for 2,000 plus years. Much longer, 10 times longer than we've had access and exposure to Eastern ideas and ideals. But the other blessing, besides just exposure, is we live in a world of enough abundance where we can not just hear these ideas, but we can reflect on them. Where we can carve out 30 seconds to think through the logic of unity. We have technology where you can carve out 15 seconds to ask, is there any logic to a universe built on unity instead of diversity? You could ask, in those same 15 seconds, is there any logic to Advaita Vedanta, a non-dual view of the universe? Last episode, I mentioned I would do an episode on peace and prosperity, and I planned to do that one today. But once I saw this question and answer, I just started to think, man, go to the end. Vedanta means end of knowledge. The end of our ignorance is knowledge. The end of the illusion that we are separate, the illusion of diversity, of separateness. It is not just unity, it is in knowledge, and this philosophy is so logical, systematic in its approach, that you could say it's not even in knowledge, it's not in philosophy. To unveil our ignorance, that's what apocalypse means, is to unveil our ignorance. Perhaps all we need is logic. That's today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.